Good afternoon and welcome to the Minerva Center for the Study of the Rule of Law Under Extreme Conditions seminar. We were very hoping to have this meeting in person in our Haifa campus, but circumstances are such that we decided to have this meeting on Zoom, and I very much hope that we'll meet in person very soon at the beautiful campus of the University of Haifa. We are honored to have with us today Dr. Limor Yehuda, who was a postdoc at the Minerva Center and writes a lot about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And today she will talk about the two-state solution that can fit us in the circumstances of the current war. I think very few people actually talk about the two-state solution, and it will be great to hear from you and discuss things that look at this time very, very remote and far away. So, Limor, the floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Eli, and for the invitation to be with you again. I am going to talk about a two-state solution that can work. It means that not all two-state solution can work, to my mind. Just a second. Okay, so in a way for the presentation, and I will try to do that as quickly as possible, I want to have 5 quick steps. First, to start with a note about the current moment, and then to learn from other places, because as you will see, what I will offer as a vision will seem even more remote than what you imagined, Eli. And therefore, I want to start with learning from other places, then to talk a little bit about the vision of the two states that can work to my analysis, to offer some notes about the transition process, and maybe the 5th is not relevant for our conversation, but we can touch it maybe later. So a note about the current moment. It's dark, and not only the moment, but actually we are in a dark era. Now with the re-rise of Trump to power, it's also dark probably in the States, or maybe at least for some people it seems like that, but also maybe around the world. And I think we are in a moment of great uncertainty, and I have no idea where our region and the world will be in 6 months, in a year, in 4 years. However, what I want to say that I know is where I want us to go, why I think it's a good idea, my vision, the vision, it's not only mine, but the vision that I'm offering, and how we can pave the road to get there, or at least some initial thoughts about the road, or what we can do in order to pave that road. So I want to start with the destruction. October 7th and all that is unfolding in our land since then has thrust the area into an unprecedented disaster, catching even those who are watching the events closely by surprise and horror. Faced with the current widespread death and destruction in the south of Israel, in the north, in Lebanon, in the West Bank, but most of all in Gaza, and with the looming danger of further escalation of the war, most Israelis and Palestinians experience strong feelings, not only of hatred and mistrust, but also of despair and of choosing war over peace. And I'm sure many of you have seen this statistics that was shown by Haaretz a week or 2 ago, like to show how little is the support for a two-state solution, but also demonstrating how many are preferring a regional war over a regional peace. So in a way, we are in the midst of more than a century-long conflict, and looking in a very broad strokes, what are the alternatives that we have? So I divided them into three. One is control, which is based on structural discrimination or can vary between structural discrimination, military regime, occupation, apartheid. Another one is elimination. And I think control is what we had or what we still have since 67, also before, but within the 67 lines, within the green line, we had it also from 48. But between the river and the sea, we have it since 67. This was military regime, embedded structural discrimination through a military occupation, and some have already identified that as an apartheid regime, de facto or de jure to some extent. Another option is elimination. And elimination includes ethnic cleansing and genocide. And I think we are in that kind of phase of not dealing anymore with the problem, but aiming to eliminate the problem. But the alternative to those are coexistence. And how coexistence can come about, it can be by nationalism or through the lens that I offer of collective equality, which can be within one, two, or more states. But the principle is of equality and non-domination between the groups. What do I learn from other conflicts? As many of you already know, I take a lot from the knowledge that is that we have in the literature and comparative cases of ethno-national conflicts. Those conflicts can be identified in various theoretical frameworks. One thing that I take from this literature is to understand that most of our conflicts today are not wars between states, but wars between groups that are identified as ethnic or national. So we are within that kind of conflict. So it means that we need to learn from all those experiences or at least we can. One case in point, especially, so it's one of the cases that I've studied during the last years. And I think it's useful even more so after the 7th of October. While I studied it before the 7th of October, I always said, okay, to the kind of violence that the world saw in Bosnia during the war of the 90s, we have not reached. And since 7th of October, this is no longer the case. We are in that kind of war and violence. A few words about that. Bosnia was one of the republics of the Yugoslav state. And while each of the countries in ex-Yugoslavia was a mixture of different ethnic groups, Bosnia was the most multicultural or heterogeneous of them all, including around half Muslim Bosniaks, a third Bosnian Serbs, and Bosnian Croats. And the war in Bosnia started the day after independence. Independence was declared led by the Bosniaks, together, which paired with the Bosnian Croats, a move that was harshly rejected by the Bosnian Serbs, that were the strong party and hold the army of the Yugoslavia Union. So they started the war. The logic of the war was ethnic segregation because their political demands were rejected. And I'm not going into the details. They went into a war of ethnic cleansing, and that was the policy. Actually, while we are already used to using that name, that phrase, it was actually coined during those wars. The result of that war, 3.5 years of war, were about 100,000 people dead, millions of refugees and displaced, tens of thousands that were tortured, including women in rape camps. That was the wars that sexual violence became a war, declared war crime, and part of understanding that it's part of a war strategies, and was already including a genocide event of the Srebrenica case. How this war ended in a comprehensive peace deal led, enforced, semi-enforced by the US. But this is the only thing that brought this war to an end. Initially, many analysts didn't believe or didn't trust that this peace will hold, and it did. The piece was, so the framework is combined between, I frame it as together and apart. So together meaning, so the constitutional structure of Bosnia after the war is not what we are familiar with liberal democracies. This is the presidency of Bosnia. It consists of three presidents, three representatives of each of the groups that were fighting with each other, and with a structure of federal structure that takes two entities, and there are further separations or autonomies within each of them, or especially within the Federatia of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So I'm not going into the details, just saying that although the structure and the policy of the war was ethnic cleansing, the end result was you need to stick together, while not only together and apart, but you're staying within one state. The transition process, and this is really crucial, I think also for us, there was an establishment by the international community of a transitional international authority that took control over Bosnia and assisted to build the state, to stabilize the state, and to gradually build it and to transfer the authorities to local actors. Why and how did they go for power sharing? This is the kind of structure, constitutional structure that was that Bosnia has adopted, because the world refuses to change international borders and legitimize ethnic cleansing, and because they are physically intertwined and interdependent also after this horrific war. And they do it, as I just said, also by this assistance, the international assistance in the form of peacekeeping forces and helping in building the state. Okay, so how do I translate that to our place? I want to start with a vision. I think many times we're talking about a model, and we're going straight into the details and whether it's possible, and we're thinking about it, looking at what seems to us feasible vis-a-vis current realities. And I think we need to change our perspective. And the first thing we need to change is not stop looking at the current moment, but look to the horizon. We need to have a clear vision of where we want to head. And here is my declaration of a vision. After 100 years of bloody conflict, the two nations, I mean Israelis, or the Jewish people in Israel, and the Palestinians, have embarked on a path of historic reconciliation. This reconciliation, based on principles of recognition, mutual respect, partnership, and equality, enables them, both of them, to live in peace and security within the framework of two sovereign states, Israel and Palestine, in their historical homeland. Resolving the conflict has allowed Israel and Palestine to connect to the Middle Eastern region, enabling regional cooperation in various fields. And if we take it into each of the states, redirecting the parties' resources from war and conflict management to growth, welfare, and culture, has set both states and their citizens on a path of prosperity. And Israel, being the national home of the Jewish people, is a democratic state that is good to live in, it is stable, and so forth. And this is the same, of course, and those articulations can be more personalized. So those are, in a way, what I'm looking at as what are the fundamental goals and interests that each of the parties are looking for to be secured within any kind of model, in any kind of political model. And I think those are not really contested. So I want to jump into, in a way, the question. If we are clear about the goals, and we can, of course, debate them, but I think anyone that is serious and hold ethical perception, I think we can agree on those things, more or less. If those are the goals, and in a second I will talk about my premises. What are my assumptions? The question is, how are we best strategizing to realize the vision and the goals for both parties? And here are some basic facts. Where are we at? So I'm starting with this, that between the river and the sea is a land that is recognized by two peoples as their historical homeland. And I insist that it's between the river and the sea is perceived by both of them as their historical homeland. The 67 borders are not the historical homeland as both of them see, depicted in those medallions. But still, we have two peoples that both of them are aspiring for self-determination. Another point that I will elaborate in a minute, is that what we are facing is ethno-national mixing and comprehensive dependence that cannot be avoided. We can, even if we'll take different acts, we need to acknowledge that. And another point is Israeli control and supremacy of the entire region and over the Palestinians of the entire between the entire land between the river and the sea, today including Gaza. What are my basic assumptions for a stable peace, or for a sustainable peace? It will be more accurate. So I'm starting with mutual recognition of a common historical homeland, the land of Israel and Palestine. So not rejecting that as something threatening peace, but actually endorsing that this is a fundamental premise or a belief of both people. We need to allow the realization and the aspiration of both people to self-determination, to understand that separation is neither possible nor desirable, and that instead of Israeli Jewish domination, what we need to seek is collective equality. So I want to elaborate on two of the points. And Eli, you can tell me how long do I have, okay? Give me a warning, and I will speed up when needed. So I think those נתונים, forgot the word, נתונים, data, are familiar. We have 9.5 million citizens, Jewish and Palestinians in Israel. Of them, around 8 million are Jews and others, and around 1.6 Palestinians. Of the Israeli Jews, we have 750 around in settlements and in East Jerusalem. I will note that this data is based on information that is prior to October 7. I do not know any new data that relates to people that have left the country, so I think things have changed, but I don't have access to data since then. In Palestine, we have 5.5 million, which are not citizens, because there is no state of Palestine that can give citizenship. Of them, 3 million in the West Bank, around 2 in Gaza, and around 500,000 in East Jerusalem. So what I want to show is that the mixture is all around. It's not only in the West Bank, it's not only in Jerusalem. We are mixed in all of the country. If we're zooming into the occupied territory, the West Bank, and I think I'm doing that slide in a way to set aside what we have in mind as the two-state solution. And I will call the two states the old or the familiar two-state solution that I would regard as a two-state solution that cannot work. And that kind of two-state solution is premised on the idea that we're going to have land swaps, and all the other settlers, Jewish settlers that live beyond those spots of land will be evacuated, either willingly or forcefully. And I want to look also, so I will just take a note on that data, that this is the estimation that between 115 and 175 thousands out of the settlers' population live outside the settlement blocks, and it's not only illegal or unauthorized outputs, okay? Some of them are long-established settlements. So, of course, all the settlements are illegal under international law. It is clear to all of us. However, and according to Israeli law, there are some differences, but we need to acknowledge that there is a very large population that lives outside. If we are the most leaning towards the old way of thinking about the two states, this is the numbers that we need to face. Another crucial thing is Jerusalem, and I think things have shifted in Jerusalem since it was divided until 67. Yes, until 67, Jerusalem was physically divided between its two parts. But since then, more than 50 years ago, things have shifted really dramatically. And also they shifted dramatically over the last 20 years with Israelis and Palestinians, which are mixed all around. So I would argue that there is no possibility of dividing Jerusalem between Jews and Palestinians without totally creating a total destruction of Jerusalem. And that by itself will take, I don't know how long. But I think it's problematic to think about peace while creating such massive destruction of the capital city. Okay, so I would argue that there is no possibility to divide in Jerusalem, and if you cannot separate in Jerusalem, then you need to live with the fact that separation is not possible. That's okay. This is our excerpts from a publication by Yesha, Judea and Samaria governance, that tries to show why it's impossible that Israel will withdraw from the West Bank. And I think they make a right point, that the West Bank is totally in control of the major population areas of Jerusalem. And I think that explains why Israelis are so afraid from the IDF to withdraw from these areas. So in a way, even if we're going into separation, we cannot avoid the problem of mistrust, that there is no trust in the other side, okay? There is no a way around it. So why not strive for separation? Why not cut the codependence between the people? So here are 3 points. Full separation is impossible. Partition will not lead to demographic separation and to the creation of homogeneous nation states. Forced eviction is ineffective and raises moral and legal difficulties and will not lead to stable or sustainable peace. And comprehensive dependence that cannot be severed due to great physical proximity and dependence in a variety of areas, including the economy, security, public health, ecology, and the environment, natural resources, infrastructure, and more. And therefore, my suggestion is to think outside of the box. It's essential to rethink the assumption that separation is necessary or desirable for achieving our vision, the vision that we started with, and I think that we agree on. For example, if we'll take the Gaza example, then Gaza was complete separation, and it led to the most severe violence between Israel and the Palestinians, while in Israel, the relations are relatively non-violent. So why do I advocate for collective equality? I think you heard a lot of that. I will say only 3 points. So based on studies, many studies that I build on about conflicts and peace processes, violent conflicts reflect a struggle for domination and control, who will rule over whom. And in a situation of codependence between the groups, equality between the nations, the rival nations, in the sense of the absence of control and domination, is the only sustainable alternative to conflict. And apart from normative considerations, there are pragmatic and effectiveness considerations. Inequality between groups increases the risk of violent conflict, while equality-based peace arrangements are more stable. So I think that once we are building a new vision for peace, we need to rethink many of the concepts that we are used to, including peace and peace agreement and sustainable peace, but also to rethink the difference between partition and separation, and as I just did, between domination and control versus collective equality, and so forth. So if we're getting to the model, like in other places of such conflict, of intimate conflicts, what we need to look at, and because separation is not possible, and because codependence will continue, what we need to look at is an arrangement of together and apart, and to think about independence as interdependence, as Iris Marionian suggested long ago. So what we are looking at are two pillars for a peace strategy, which is based on the one hand on independence through partition. So I'm not rejecting partition. I do reject separation. So independence through partition, through two-state structure, but together, and this is a crucial part. It's not something nice to have on the side. It's like the two legs of the peace strategy, to have partnership among equals. That will reverse, or that will change the relations that are based on domination and control. So if I take it from the principles to the applied model, I'm most inclined to the model that two states in one homeland offer, a land for all, which I'm one of it's a political movement, and I'm one of its founders. It's based on mutual recognition and the principles that I've elaborated before. So we are thinking about United Jerusalem as an open city, serving as the capital of both states. To what we need, because physical separation is not possible, we need to think of how we are regulating freedom of movement, which is that while keeping, of course, security concerns and the right security arrangements. We need to build joint institutions, unlike the ones that had been established by Oslo. We need to be careful and to construct institutions that create the relations between the sides, not as one side as the dominant of the other, as it is today and since Oslo, but as joint institutions that secure the equality between the sides. And one important principle that we had adopted is that we need to rectify past injustices without creating new ones. Okay. I don't want to go into those details, and if there is anything in particular that is interested, we can go back to that. But in this kind of thinking, what we need to look at are that in all sections of life and of governance, we need to look at two separate things. One is what out of that should be or will be handled independently, like in a part, and what of it needs to be thought and regulated together, because we are codependent. So we can look at it as even about democracy. We need to, as we all know, the Palestinian society is totally in wrecks. And as we can acknowledge also the Israeli society at the moment as a dysfunctional democracy or declining or whatever word we will call it. So both societies are struggling with our national structures. We need to think about citizenship and residency, about security, language, education, culture, religion, economy and work, health, social welfare, transportation, etc., everything. We need to think under this framework. What is it that we can and we want to deal with apart, and what do we need to do together, and in what kind of together, what kind of institution? And just like to say, okay, we think that this vision is naive. I will argue, I think I argued already, but I want to stress that it's a pragmatic and realistic approach based on accumulated experience in peace processes. It's supported by research, the reduced likelihood of violence and conflict, and conditions of sustainable peace. And I will also argue that brutality or inhumanity is not more realistic or more pragmatic than a human vision for our future. And I think what this vision is offering is a positive vision that respects human beings as equals and making it a genuine vision for sustainable peace. And Ellie, if you want me to finish, so I will take one more minute even. And that's beautiful. I'm sure, even if you're going with me all the way and you will say, okay, that's beautiful. How are we going to get there? So we can think about the transition process. So I will add, okay, if we agreed on that that's the right way forward, then we can debate or discuss or brainstorm what is the transition process that could work. And I started with the Bosnian example. I think it is certain, it's clear to me that we will need external help, and I call it help. And intractable conflict and nations in a state of existential anxiety, we will definitely need help. A bridge could be an international transitional authority that will be not only in Gaza, but also in Gaza and the West Bank, that will replace Israeli occupation. We need to build fair joint institutions that could be built again gradually. It needs to change how the Oslo regime shifted crafted these institutions. We need to have an alternative vision and culture. So this is maybe the first thing. We need to have an alternative vision. I think people that see themselves as thought leaders need to be clear about what is the vision for our future. And then we will shift also how we are perceiving a lot of other things. And we need any kind of support for the new paradigm in any way forward. Few guidelines, I think, for the road is realism, in a way avoiding. I think part of the problem of Oslo was that we thought that peace is going to come in a minute, right? And it's very easy and it's just around the corner. So we need to be realistic, avoid promises that cannot be fulfilled and create excessive expectations. We need to build resilience for the process itself, to cope with setbacks along the way and with spoilers, that even once we will have an agreement or even a clear vision that many of us share, there will be a lot of spoilers, and we need flexibility to listen to objections and to develop appropriate responses to them. But if I take only one point, is this one, that we need to start with the recognition that we are both nations, both people are in the same boat, and we are in the eye of the storm, and we have one choice, and the choice is not whether we are together in this, but how are we acting? How do we deal with that? Are we acting together, and then we might save ourselves from the storm, or are we going to continue to fight and be drawn together as we are today? Yes, so thank you. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Limor. Was fascinating, and it's really encouraging to see your enthusiasm about the project. The floor is open for questions and remarks. Maybe I will start. You said that the program, I share your vision. And you said that the program is both realistic and pragmatic. There is a difference between realistic and pragmatic. And the real question is, how to construct, okay, how do you envisage the materialization of this direction when the leadership of both sides, as well as the international leadership, as you mentioned at the beginning of your talk about the new administration in the US, is totally in the opposite direction. So I see the vision, but I see it more as a utopia and I don't see the way that we can actually go towards this direction at the moment. So what can be the practical things besides civil society to switch to this direction?
Ellie, should I answer? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so thank you, of course. Of course, this is the question. Actually, so my research during the last years is around that, is the question of how, not only the question of where. Because I think part of the how is to clarify more the where. So there is a lot of work to be done here, right? Because all the work that have been done until now, in a way, is not the right way forward, but because so much effort in thinking and in research has been invested in a way, in the wrong way, in thinking about how we are creating separation between us. Now we need to reverse. This is why, although we both of us, in a way, it could be confusing. I'm talking also about two states, but it's a different, totally different vision of a two states. And I think it takes us to rethink also the path forward. So with regard to where we can go, I think we definitely need to start with the civil society because that's what we have, right? But there's million of things that can be done that are at the moment, it could create this vision as more pragmatic and realistic. And as many people more will hold that vision, at the moment, some leaders, I don't know how many already, some leaders say, yes, the two-state solution is the right way forward. But as I can judge, none of them actually believe in that. And therefore, they do not really do anything to promote that. And I think once we have a vision that seems to us pragmatic and holding to our core ideas, core values, core things that are important to us, both of the nations. So I think what we need to start is with that, with what I said, and then the path forward will be created more and more. And I think at the moment we are in a very dark time. It cannot happen in a month. But as we know from history, we know that sometimes windows of opportunity open, and we need to be prepared for that time, for that moment that the window of opportunity will be. We need to be prepared not only with a vision, but also with more better ideas of how to get to that. So that's my answer of how it.
Thanks. Amnon.
Thank you. Indeed, as Eli said, this is good to hear. But I have, and I agree with you that more work needs to be done in order to be able to know what we're talking about. Also, in order to be able to generate feasibility or viability of this, which was your answer to Eli's question. And it is in that vein that I want to ask you. I'm not sure. At a certain point, the plan gets fuzzy because you say you have all the right reasons why full separation is untenable. But then you don't say what is tenable in the sense of what? All the settlements will stay in place, and then who will govern the settlements? Israel will govern the settlements. What does it mean that will Palestine then govern Palestinians inside of Israel? What does it mean that we'll have those joint areas where decisions are made together in practice? So I think a lot more work. So my question is there more detail on that so we can decide to assess whether it's realistic, whether it's just? So how can we fill in the gaps?
Thank you, Amnon. So I want to start with that. In a way, I want to erase the if question, the beginning of if it's possible. I will argue that this is the only possibility. to get out of the eternal war that we are in. This is the only, and when I'm saying the only, I mean based on the principles that I offered, not the concrete model, okay? And so I think we can, if we can agree on the principles, we can then go and discuss the details, the more details, okay? There are many levels of details that needs to be built on the core principles that I offered. And with regard to the details, they're in the model that I'm presenting, and there were some more details, just a matter of time, it's a complex issue. I could not go into the details. So there are some more details, not a lot of them. And this is the work that I think needs to be done now very, very quickly, as much as possible, to go and to build the details. So we have one option. I don't think there is only one option for how to take those principles into practicality, okay? I think we can develop different options to apply them. So one option is the one that I showed. So this in my model, we have clear borders, meaning clear borders identified by international law along the 67 borders. And it's not because I'm relating to those borders as holy or something that is sacred, just because this is, like, as we know, international law, and both states can decide if this is for the benefit of both of them. They can decide to swap lands if it's good. Okay, I'm not against changing lands, but even if after changing lands, as we said, there will be settlers behind the green line in the Palestinian state. In our model, this model, it means that settlers that are living stop being settlers. The only option for them is to remain as residents in a Palestinian state. And it means that they are equal residents in a Palestinian state. And this is why we need to think about it really carefully. Because so in this model, it doesn't mean that all of them stay. It means that they have an option to stay. Of course, not everything, everywhere, whatever, and not with all the lands that they have been taken, but in a way avoiding the need to be involved in forceful evacuation of people, and definitely the masses of people. And so, and this is rooted in other justifications if we are going into the model of partnership and not of separation. So, but the idea is, and this is with regard to the settlers. With regard to Palestinians in Israel, we are talking about no change of citizenship is offered. So we have the state of citizenship, but then we are resolving the unresolved status of settlers. We have the right of return, of course, that is acknowledged, and all Palestinian refugees are entitled, like any Jew. It will continue, and it's in a way the prerogative of both states to decide who they grant citizenship to. But this is part of the citizenship, and therefore, because we are offering freedom of movement gradually along security, that is in line with security concerns, that needs to be mutual. The security is not a concern only of one side; it's a concern of all sides. All sides wants to be secure, so security, of course, needs to be taken care of. And this is part of the details that needs to be accounted for when we are developing the model further. But again, so if we are agreeing on the principles, let's go into the details and debate them and see what is the best option. But for me, it's not an if. This is the way, and then we can debate the details.
Thank you, Limor. Stefan, nice to see you.
Yeah, nice to see you. And thanks for giving me the floor. In between, I was thrown out by Zoom, and so I had to come back. No, thank you very much, Limor. I share practically all your assumptions that in the long run, it's the only realistic option, and it's the only option which is compatible with international law. The other options, clearly, neither ethnic cleansing nor sustained control in the current mode, are really compatible with our global system. When listening to your remarks, I was immediately thinking on the case of Belgium, because you refer to Bosnia-Herzegovina, because there you also have a kind of two historically hostile communities. And they separated them territorially with two regions as territorial units. You have the capital of Brussels as a corpus separatum, and you have the two communities which are organizing mostly for cultural purposes, the two separate nations in kind of with competence across the entire territory in serving certain needs also of the members of the group living in the territories of the other regions. And I find that, which doesn't argue Belgium is a very complex case, but it's an interesting case of inspiration, I think, and I simply wanted to point to that.
Yes, thank you. And 2 years ago, we had a conference at Van Leer, and Paul Magnier had talked about yes, and I think many ideas and lessons should be learned also from the Belgian and other cases that it's been used, also from the European Union. I think the European Union is definitely something that we can draw a lot of lessons from. Also with regard to the gradual progression and other stuff. Yeah, thank you. Yes.
But both Belgium and Bosnia is a one-state solution and not two-state solution. So why?
Well, with Bosnia, I'm not so sure whether it's because the roof level doesn't really work. It's a kind of dysfunctional system.
Yeah. So I will say.
I think in essence it's two states.
Yeah. So it's officially because it has only one representation in the UN, so it is one state, but practically it's more. I think when I'm thinking about one state, two states, I think not as a dichotomy, but as a spectrum. And I think this is how we need to look at it. It's not really dramatically different. I think in our case, it's better that we will have two representatives in the UN. I think this is like the starting point that we're starting with, and I don't think realistically, if I'm talking realistically, I don't think that the two nations will agree to give up that right that they have. So my assumption is that this is the more realistic way forward than the one-state solution, which is, I don't think, a pragmatic or a realistic solution. It is a state. We are in a one-state reality, but this is not a solution. That's my analysis of that. And therefore, I think we need to look at it as a spectrum. And this is why I'm thinking our line of thinking needs to be what we are doing together, what we are doing apart, and along with that. And regarding all states are, so Bosnia is, of course, is a case, it's a hard case. As Stefan said, it's dysfunctional. So my answer to that is that we need to work very hard to make our case better. We are in a very difficult situation. Look around what's happening. So everything, we need to measure it, not in comparison to Switzerland, but comparison to the massive destruction that we're starting with. What is the future that we want to build here in what is the alternatives for us, not for any optimal future that we might be if we were living in Finland. So in a way, we need to work, we need to be clearer. In order for the international help that hopefully will come, we will know how to guide it the best. That it will not guiding us, but we will guide it, but still we will need it.
Thanks. Fadi.
Hi. So Limor and I have had some conversations already. So a comment and a question. I think the challenge that we see in terms of governance coming from both Bosnia and Herzegovina and Belgium, a case with which I'm more familiar, invite a lot of questioning about the bifurcated federal model used to accommodate national aspirations. I think the opposite model, which suggests a one-state solution, a liberal democracy, doesn't work clearly when you have such entrenched notions of identity and historical enmity. But I think what is not being considered is a larger kind of or smaller unit of a federal system or confederal system So one of my arguments regarding federalism in Belgium is that federalism should have been kind of designed around the provinces rather than creating two large units that can leverage their weight at the federal level and obstruct governance. But we'll not go there at the moment. So I think when we're visioning things, we shouldn't stop just at peace. We should also consider governance and how the dynamics of governance are going to be dictated by the constitutional design we adopt. And experience shows that bifurcated design creates a lot of challenges in terms of sticking to the principles of the original intent. I'll stop that here, but my question is, where do you see the role of the international community? Because as you and I both know from the literature on power sharing, most models are adopted after some form of international intervention / imposition. That if we look at Northern Ireland, at Lebanon, at Bosnia and Herzegovina, Belgium in this regard is a very unique case where the transition was very organic and local without much international intervention, but we can't discount the role that the EU or the influence that the EU had. So how do you envision both structurally and in terms of the transition or the preparation towards kind of such a vision for the international community, especially the US?
So with regard to the comment, I think this is part of the things that we need to debate and discuss once. And again, being realistic, and there are many concerns that need to be accounted for in this regard. With the international involvement, I heard 2 days ago Daniel Levy that clearly states, don't count on the US for anything, okay? So I don't think we can count on the US, but we can count on the international community. And as I think there is no possibility that the two peoples will be able to do that by ourselves. It's too complicated, so we must have external help. And how do I see it? As I said, I think some kind of window of opportunity might show up in a year or less than a year, and I'm saying it after 7th of October. I didn't say it before. I think the kind of disaster that we are thrown and the danger that we are posing not only to ourselves and to our close neighbors, but also to the region, and maybe it's also global concern. So I think this is something that we need to stress also, we need to stress it, that we need help in order to have not only peace, but in a way, this kind of future that we are envisioning for us, that is a vision of flourish and successful two states that live along together and apart with each other. So that's what I can say for a moment.
Nadiv.
Hey, Limor. So nice to listen to you. And as an utopian scholar myself, it is extremely important to encourage every single one that thinks in your direction. So obviously, I recognize with the design and the proposed solution. I just want to take Fadi's question just to push it forward. The assumption, you have an assumption that we need external help. And this is something that based on the Yugoslavian experience and so on and so forth. I think that now the international legal order and the international community is divided in the sense that there are forces that are not just unexpected to be involved in this situation, but they are actively promoting a different transformative vision for the region. So this is something that you might address. My question is more about what happens between the violent escalation and transitional processes. So what we are experiencing in recent years that could make us, think about our assumption to how to solve the conflict is the Gaza war. And this is a case of an extreme violent escalation, even in terms of what we are familiar with this conflict in the region. So I hear a lot of people, and I think you also said something about it just now, answering to Fadi, that sees this as I won't call it an opportunity, but sees this year as a cataclysmic event that might change things to other direction. What I wanted to ask is if you can tell us something. I don't know what will unfold, but if you can tell us something about the case studies that you are more familiar with them, we know about Yugoslavia, maybe other places as well. What is the chronology, the dynamics between the point of the violent escalation and the transition or the leaning towards all kinds of different visions and solutions? And do you see a way in which we can go the same path? And alternatively, also something that is worthy to talk about, what can be the worst case scenario, right? Can we face a situation in which we are going even deeper towards more violence and not other visions? Thank you.
Thank you, Nadiv. So, yeah, the answer to your last question is yes. More likely we are going down the road of destruction. This is the likely assessment. Okay, I'm not here about assessments. I'm in a way want to shift our thinking about what we want, and I believe in a way in the power of man to change course. So I think in order to avoid the further destruction, Bosnia wars lasted for 3.5 years until the international community seriously interrupted that. And so in a way, in my analysis, I compare and build on the two examples of Northern Ireland on the one hand and Bosnia on the other, which show different paths towards peace. And my analysis of the North, so before the 7th of October, I built more on the experience of Northern Ireland. I didn't see any potential for massive international involvement, the thing that is needed. And therefore I thought, okay, what we need to seek is gradual closing the gaps between the two sides, between the two nations, in order allowing eventually that we will see power sharing among us as something that is more feasible. Okay, but I think after the 7th of October, I shifted. I think these processes are still needed. It's not that they are not needed anymore. They do need, but I think at the moment we need to sequence differently, because during war you have, I don't know, but we need to think in parallel paths all the time. Everything that seems to us as a good idea, we need to pursue it in a way. Okay, it's not that there is only one line of thinking and one line of acting. So all those ideas are also relevant today, and if we can promote them, fine. But I think at the moment, because of the catastrophe, there is an opening, which I don't know when it will happen, when this window of opportunity will show up. But there is an opportunity that for a massive international involvement, the kind that we have seen in Bosnia, in East Timor, that is built not only about crafting or helping to coerce an international agreement, but also boots on the ground that help to build the new reality. And also after that, it's a long process of transition until it's functional. But we know that we are on the right way forward, at least.
Shiran.
Yeah. Hi, Limon. Thank you very much. It was such an optimistic lecture, and we are so eager for optimism these days. So thank you for this. I think the comparison to the Yugoslav bloody wars was very interesting, in my opinion. And my question is I'm basically continuing, I think, Amnon's and Fadi's points from another perspective. And I would like to hear your take about the place of the law in these reconciliation efforts, if it has any role in your opinion. And I also refer to transitional justice tools, as well as criminal prosecution for past crimes. And I mean, we know that the ICTY, the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia, didn't succeed to bring reconciliation to the former Yugoslavia, even though peace efforts and national reconciliation were really, really important objectives of this tribunal. However, in practice, its judgments and verdicts deepened the ethnic polarization. So I would really, really like to hear your take about the role of maybe international criminal prosecutions in trying to achieve reconciliation in the Israeli-Palestinian case. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon, for that. So, since I'm a lawyer, we better talk about law. So, in a way, my conception of collective equality was initiated by the problem that I saw in international law, not only as not helping, but actually as disrupting. So, in a way, my analysis is offering how international law can help regulate instead of become something that is really obstructing those kinds of processes. And I think so the first move will be to adopt collective equality as something that is part of the understanding of self-determination and of equality within international law. And so I think the role of international law needs to be helping and guiding the parties and the structures that are being built to become to create that, right? I think this is what the law should do, to help the parties to make their relations peaceful and to construct the more adequate structures. With regard to transitional justice and with regard to criminal proceedings, I think I would offer, and this is how I teach transitional justice, at least I'm trying to shift how we're thinking about transitional justice from this narrow legalistic framework or that is focused on the retrieving of truth and of accountability, thinking about more broadly about justice as a political concept, and the transition that needs to take place. It's built on my analysis of why conflicts erupt, or what are the conditions that usually conflicts erupt in, which are built on injustices, and the process that needs to take place is correcting those injustices, focusing on a broader understanding of what justice is and misjustice is. And I think I agree with your comment about the role of criminal proceedings. And here I think I'm building also on Mamdani's view on that point. If you're familiar with him, okay, so I can point to that. So in a way, I think the same. I think that sometimes, and especially in the Bosnian case, the recognition of Srebrenica as a genocide becomes a really hard problem. Like Serbs until today do not acknowledge Srebrenica as a genocide, and it becomes another point for them not to disagree, and in a way making reconciliation even harder between the sides. So I'm really hesitant about that. I think that in circumstances like ours, the law and legal procedures, as well, being a human rights lawyer in my past as well, I know that legal procedures are an avenue that the weak can that create some kind of force that he doesn't have in other spheres. But it's a very not very. It's another promise that does not deliver in most of the cases.
Benny.
Hi, Limor. Thank you very much for your talk. Thank you very much for your very optimistic view. And I would say, and there's no other view to hold, which because any other view also has to be optimistic in these days. And I think, you're talking about power sharing, and I think talking about sharing the whole land has become part of the academic discourse ever since the beginning of 2000, since the fall of the Oslo Accords and so on, because we find it difficult to divide the land, the problem of division. But I'm not sure. I mean, besides there's all the practical issues, but so on the one hand we have the division, and on the other hand we have the sharing. But the sharing also has quite a a lot of obstacles, and not only practical obstacles. First thing, I mean, like as a general principle, we need equality, and that no one side will dominate the other, and that's very optimistic. I mean, like here in Israel, we find it hard to have real equality between citizens inside the 67 borders. How will we do that when we have another 5 million Palestinians? And that's also taking the view that, when you're talking about, when I just said here in Israel, we find it hard to create equality. That's when Israel is creating equality, but when you're talking about something different, you're talking about real, two forces which are actual, equal, and they cooperate. And if the Israeli Jewish side won't give up its domination, there won't be real sharing and real cooperation on the other side. And that's very that's also practical, and also more of the principle of how we do the sharing. I mean, I thought, and just thinking about it, I thought okay, here in Israel it's the last point. Here in Israel, we think about, we have lots of discussion about what does it mean to be like a Israeli state, Jewish state, and the whole question about the public space, particularly between the seculars and the non-seculars and the Haredim. Okay, so what do we do in the public space in this sharing model? That's a question.
Thank you, Benny. So there are a lot of questions here, and I'll try to briefly answer them. I think, so if everybody agree with me on the principles, I'm really happy. And and in a way I'm saying, okay, so let's go on that road and explore all the questions. And I don't think I have all the answers to all the questions, the practical questions. I have some of the answers, and I encourage anyone to keep on and dig more and give his own or her own answers to those questions. So if we agree on equality, equality is hard to get everywhere, okay? If we're looking everywhere in any aspect of life, if we're taking the aim to bring about equality for women, so the fact that it's hard to get there and we're still not there, although it was acknowledged and endorsed so many years ago, it doesn't mean that we need to give it up. We just need to figure out better ways to do that and to invent all the time ways, but we're not giving up that this is the right model for us. This is the right vision for us. So I think that's why the vision is so crucial, because we need to know where we are heading. What is more relevant than other things? And I agree with you that it's very hard. I think one point about that is what kind of equality I mean when I'm talking about equality, okay? So since I'm talking about two states and not one, okay, so let's think about it. And I know nothing can be compared, but think about it not as two segments in the same country, but for example, Germany and France, okay? So we have equality. When I'm talking about equality in the states, in between the two states, I mean that neither of them dominate the other. And we take a structural guidelines, not just guidelines. We are building structures that will maintain as much as possible or prevent as much as possible that one side will dominate the other. That's the major idea. In my book, I develop further this idea of collective equality, okay? So it's different from when we're talking about individual equality and when I'm talking about collective equality. It's not instead of that, but it's in addition to. Okay, and whether Israel will agree, Israel definitely will not agree. And I think this is not only because of Israel. This is the pathologies of such conflicts, that we have one side which is dominant and is not willing to give its power, and it can even believe that with really good reasons, because we are afraid. and we have good reasons to be afraid, okay? And that's why, part of why we need external help to get rid of that domination, to have our to have the back for us to guarantee the transfer of power that will not, as much as possible, not risk the positions of the sides. And how the partnership can be done, this is something that needs to be built. And it needs to be built by experience, by crafting it from advance, but also there is no alternative from building the experience. And the part of the problem is that since Oslo, we are doing the opposite. We do not know Palestinians. They don't know us. We have hardly any relations between them, especially in the academia, but not only in academia, everywhere. And I think this is something that we need to understand, that it's a problem, and we need to start building that and striving for that. And then we will have better ideas of how we can cooperate in all levels.
Thank you, Limor. Yali.
Hi, Limor, and thanks for sharing with us your optimistic vision. And again, I think that some of the questions are, those who ask them are hesitant because they don't want to challenge this optimistic view. And sorry. But there seems to be a contrast, right? Because if here in this virtual room, we are all very excited about this vision, so how come in the polls that you've shown us, there's so little support for it? And I think that you've touched upon at least one of the main reasons, which is the existential fears that both communities have, probably are more justified since both the attack on October 7 and the events that followed. And so, right, we have a huge elephant in the room, which is how can we elevate those fears? And then I thought during the discussion, so what are we doing? Is it a political discussion or an academic one? And it seems that the academic benefit here is this vision of comparative conflict resolution, or you can call it, I don't know how you frame the field, but right, we have an experience from Bosnia, an experience from maybe several conflicts, and I thought to myself that maybe what can potentially elevate the fear is not stories of success, but exploring whether there were stories of failure. Right? Because if we hear something like, okay, in these three cases, there was a huge success, but, we have another story where where they just destroyed each other completely. I don't think that the fear will be elevated in this case. We'll say, okay, we have, 75% of good future, but also some risk of really even worse than now, even if it's hard to think about it. But Murphy told us that tomorrow will be probably worse. And so I would love to hear about whether there are stories of failure and whether you can write and what can we learn from those failures and how we can make sure that we will not be one of these stories.
Thank you, Yali. I want to say something about all of you saying that I'm optimistic and that I'm utopian. So first of all, I'm realistic utopia, taking Rawls' notion of that. I think this is what I'm offering. At least that's what I'm aiming. And I think the challenge, if you're resisting this vision, you need to challenge me of why it's not realistic utopia, not building from the current moment, but looking to the vision. And with regard to optimism, I'm not optimistic. In a way, all the chances are against us. All the chances are against us unless we unite and offer something else. And unite in a way that create an alternative force. And I think leadership here, and also people that are thinking and writing and speaking can create a new wave. That's why I think all of the people that are here and hearing this are important actors in this. And the key question is, what do we choose? Do we see a vision that is better than one? So we can debate on if we can offer a better vision, but having no alternative vision that is a good vision instead of the destruction that we are facing. So what I'm offering is to adopt a vision that offer us something to be built on and to direct our efforts. Okay, so this is for our thinking and our efforts, and whether so all of the cases that I showed are failure cases before they became successful. So Northern Ireland was after centuries of violent conflict between Irish and British, and it's not only the Northern Ireland conflict that started in the late 60s, but long ago, and Bosnia as well. I started with the war, so the war is a collapse. Is exactly the opposite. The collapse of a constitutional structure of liberal democracy, actually. And Cyprus is another case that I've studied, and it is something else. It's not succeeded. Power sharing had been tried there and was not successful. And I can say more about that it's not that power sharing is automatically, if we'll choose it, will be a success. But in a way, my argument is that this is the only path that can lead us to success. And therefore, we need to make any efforts that path will be chosen and that it will be done in a way. We have a lot of brain power here in this country, so let's use it for constructive work. And that's my offer. There is no guarantee that it will be successful, but the alternative is present to us. It's now and here in its most horrific events, and it's true. It can get worse. I hope it will not, but I'm not optimistic in that regard.
Let me push you a bit on Yali's question, because all your examples are actually European. And although we thought that the Israelis are part of Europe, it's less and less so. And the question is whether you have some interesting examples outside of Europe.
Yeah, so there are, and power sharing are being used also in Africa, in conflicts in Africa. It was attempted in Iraq, not with much success, as we know, but so failures are in abundance. So we need to acknowledge that, and we need to acknowledge why things have been gone bad, and there are lessons to be learned that are out there in the literature. So power sharing is regarded today by mediators as a tool of peacemaking, okay, everywhere in the world. And as I showed, most of the conflicts today around the world are this kind of conflict between intimate enemies, not between empire and a faraway territory that the empire could just go away, but an empire that is living within its within and very complex relations with its occupied territory. So we are not. So I think this is why I'm starting with nobody is going anywhere. While some individuals go, but none of the two nations are going to disappear, and therefore the core problem remains. And the core problem is, how are we going to live together? Because none of us are going anywhere else. And therefore, so I think that the experience also of Africa needs to be taken into place. I cannot present at the moment because this is something that I need to further my studies about. So there are so many things to be studied.
Thanks, Limor. Amnon, and I think that Amnon, Fadi, and then we'll conclude.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So for this second round of a short second round. So I think we agree that that in principle this is either it's the only one or maybe it's the best one. But the problem, of course, is in the details, and we have today still too little of them. My question is, do you think
you can point to people on the other side who are willing to participate in the conversation. So it's one thing, as Yali said, that we are here in this room, even though we are a minority in Israel itself. But are we also a minority when it comes to the Palestinians? So for this to progress, I think it might be a good idea to have as part of the group people from the Palestinian territories who are willing to say bravely that that they believe in this version of the two-state solution.
Yeah, thank you, Amnon. Yes, definitely. And as you said, exactly, we are not a minority. We are an insignificant minority in Israel at the moment. But the question is, are we going to lead this conversation to become a more dominant? This is up to us in a way, and people like us. So I'm presenting these ideas for a few years. I think even more now, there is more interest because until the 7th of October, the Israeli society was not really interested in the conflict and to how we are going to end our more than 5 decades of occupation. Okay, so now we do have a new kind of conversations around that, and I think there is a potential also here for thought leaders to lead the way. I think this is the key thing here is about leadership. And leadership is not only the political leadership, is everywhere the leadership. So I think I'm optimistic about that I do see around us a lot of people that will be willing to go on that direction. This is one. And with regard to the Palestinians, I would say yes. How many of them? So I have partners that work with me. Fadis is signaling, so he will answer that question, I think, better than I am. But I will say that I have partners that are developing with me the model, a part of a land for all. So that is part already of 12 years of work. But also with my research project at the moment, I have partners that are working on that. And that, again, we need to bring those conversations to a wider public. And I think definitely my guess is that there will be many more Palestinians than Israelis. I think the Palestinians in this regard are not the hardest, although they present at the moment a very hard positions. But maybe Fadi will continue from where I stopped.
Yeah, I can't even presume to start answering this question, and I wanted to say a different to kind of make a comment, but I think we need to look at the actors here, not as Palestinians and Jews. There are within each group cleavages built territorially, status-wise, like Palestinian citizens of Israel are also an actor in this conversation that was almost totally ignored in the Oslo agreements and processes, which I think also reflected some of the failures there. So in recognition of the different situated actors, it can't just remain at the kind of bifurcated. Again, I'm going back to this notion. So like Jewish settlers are not same as a Jewish person living in Tel Aviv in terms of the interests and the principles and the ideas that they might want to protect. I think Palestinians as well in Gaza and West Bank, especially with the PA, Palestinian Authority, that has an entrenched interest in the Oslo Accord structures, the scheme of interests are going to look very differently. My comment about failure and success, I think I'm going to go back. I mean, the presumption about power sharing as if it's a very cohesive and very full theory, it's not. So there's a lot more research that needs to be done empirically and normatively. Law has to weigh in on the conversation. So far, it's been within the domain of political scientists, and we don't have a lot of conversation about how law can influence the dynamics of power sharing structures in the post-establishment period. And a lot of the failures that happen after the peace agreement is actually signed happen because of governance issues. And that's why I think lawyers and political scientists will need to focus more on the post-establishment dynamic and not just on the questions of how we get there. how do we survive getting there is a different question that has been understudied. And I think it's a great opportunity to look into those questions. I myself, I'm trying to, but yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, so I agree.
Great. So thanks very much, Limor, for this fascinating and optimistic vision. Thanks everyone for taking part, and we'll meet in 2 weeks' time, right, Michal?
Thank you very much. Thank you for this really engaging conversation. Thank you very much.